RealAgriculture.com presents Under the Microscope with BioVision Seed Labs.
All right, so we are here with Holly Gelich of BioVision Seed Labs. We are going to talk about seed quality parameters today. So we've certainly, or grain quality parameters, sorry, we've talked about some of what you've seen from seed quality perspective, and now we're going to talk about by province, kind of what you're seeing with wheat specifically. And I will apologize for my voice. I've lost it a little bit, so take it away, Holly, so I don't have to speak.
Oh, fantastic. I'll take the floor for a while, Lindsay, just to help out with your voice there. So we've been analyzing grain quality of wheat for a couple months now. As everyone knows, the Manitoba crop came off extremely early, and that was on account of the growing conditions, as well as the seed got in the ground relatively early. So from the CWRS grain class, we have been seeing primarily number 2 grade. And we have seen some of it has been number 1, but majority of it has been number 2. And the grading factor that is bringing it down from number 1 to number 2 is 2 things. And one is light test weights, and the second one is heat damage or heat stress damage. So it very much coincides with the growing conditions that we did have in Manitoba this past season. Some of the other grading factors we are seeing, which is quite typical to the Manitoba area, is fusarium damage kernels, so FDK. We've been seeing that, as well as we've been seeing a little bit of midge damage, so wheat midge damage.
Okay. Just now, is midge damage, now are you seeing that in different areas or expanded, or just a higher level in the areas you kind of expect to see it?
I think what we're seeing is primarily the movement of the midge damage into some areas where it may not have been a problem in the past. Now, in Manitoba, it really hasn't been much of a downgrading factor, but its presence is there.
Okay. So that's interesting, because that's actually something I hadn't really heard talk of. And, of course, midge might not necessarily be something you're on the lookout for if it's not typical for your area. What does midge damage look like in a sample?
So midge damage is very unique. In a very severe case, it will cause kernel deformation, even to the fact that the kernel itself will curl slightly. So the midge infects the plant at the time it is in full head, and it gets into the kernel and feeds on it. So another thing we will sometimes see is an actual line right on the kernel itself, which is really a feeding line where it has gone along and fed all along the length of the kernel. So we'll be looking for distortion, the line, as well as what we're looking at is the bran itself. Now we're looking at the sides and the back of the bran, and quite often what we will see is the bran will start to rupture, so it will pull apart. So those are some of the characteristics of midge damage that we see.
Okay. Now, and for many farmers, obviously in Saskatchewan, they know they're in the midge-prone areas. It does seem to be cyclical, those sorts of things. So they, of course, have some options for variety selection. We do have some midge-tolerant varieties. Is that maybe something that Manitoba farmers who are finding this midge damage coming back on their seed test might look into?
I think it's definitely a watch out for future years, is to start asking the questions when you're bringing your sample into, whether it is a grain grading laboratory or whether it is your grain elevator. Are you starting to see it? Now, when it first comes in, it's not going to show in at 2% or 3%. It's going to be very, very low levels, at say 0.25%. So it's definitely a beginning of a watch out for that insect.
Okay, so a good kind of early warning, certainly. Okay, so anything on the Alberta Saskatchewan side that's really come up on a grain quality side?
Well, in Saskatchewan, we're seeing extremely variable results. We're seeing everything right from a number 1 all the way down to a feed quality. There's a lot of things going on in the Saskatchewan crop. We have seen sprouting damage, we have seen ergot, we've seen midge damage, and we've seen fusarium. So all 4 of those we have seen as downgrading factors. So bringing it from a number 1 or down to number 2 or 3 or down to feed. So Saskatchewan is very diverse, but we are seeing that the quality is not as stellar as we typically see in that wonderful wheat growing triangle.
Now let's maybe, there have been certainly a lot, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered midge. Can we touch on just light bushel weights just a little bit? Are you seeing that? Now we're talking specifically about wheat, but certainly when the oat crop was coming off in Manitoba, there was a lot of discussion about some good yields, but kind of light bushel weights. Is that, are you seeing that across the prairies, or is that very much a Manitoba thing with the heat stress that we had?
You would say it'd be severe heat stress that did cause the Manitoba crop to have light test weights, and they would be the samples that do have the lightest test weight. Now, when you move into Saskatchewan and into Alberta, there's a lot of moisture still within the ground to help fill the grain kernels. So they are, in some cases, a little lighter than average, but they're not at the point that they are downgrading the quality of the wheat.
Okay. Yeah. So for sure not wheat. Now,
really high protein. I don't know if you want to touch base on that.
Yeah. Okay, tell me a little bit about protein levels in Manitoba. Certainly I've heard some pretty high numbers, and in some years that's great. But we did just recently do a discussion about how when everyone has high protein, there's not really a premium for it. What have you seen as far as protein levels, specifically in Manitoba?
In Manitoba, we have seen levels we haven't seen in 10 years' time. We've seen in seed oil or RS protein levels 18%, even some that are a few points higher than that. So it is primarily generated from the southeast side of Manitoba, those extremely high levels of protein. But even as a general scope, you'd say Manitoba has high protein levels. Now, this can be a detriment for the barley crop, especially for the maltsters. Now they really want to see the protein levels between the 12 and 13.5%. So barley, we're seeing very similarly extremely high levels of protein. So that is going to cause a problem in the selection of the barley. Now across the rest of Western Canada, in Alberta and Saskatchewan, we're seeing the typical protein levels that have ranged from 10% up to about 13.5%. Now, keep in mind, there are a few pockets that are higher than that, but it is between that range.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Holly, once again, and we will speak very soon for the next episode of Under the Microscope.
Yes, thank you very much, Lindsay.